In the summer of '82, I was living in a small rural town in northern Florida. I was an only child, and both my parents and the rest of the town were very religious. My father and mother both worked in banking, and though we weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination, we were certainly doing all right. My childhood consisted mostly of school, church, and reading. I was not much of a social kid, so I spent most of my time inside, reading for hours on end. It was due to all this reading that I, on this particular summer, was exposed to the idea of the rebellious youth. I had recently turned 16, and I loved reading about these teens. They were standing up to authorities and listening to rock and punk music. Me, having been raised rather conservatively, had not heard a lot of rock songs besides the occasional Beatles. One evening I brought the subject up for my mother. She told me not to concern myself with such matters, and that kind of music was the work of the devil. My intrigue remained, though. Our living room and kitchen were connected in a way so that they sort of made up one large room. There was a little hint of a separation between the two, consisting of a shift in the width of the rooms, the living room being wider, but nothing besides that. Right on the edge of the living room stood a small wooden table. On this table stood a brown FM radio. My parents were not much for TV, and so they got most of their news from the radio. They seldom used it for music, besides the occasional jazz, which my father had always liked. One evening, I'd wager it had been late July. I asked my parents if they would show me how the radio worked. They were initially confused, but they also thought that a 16-year-old should be able to operate a radio, and so they agreed. After having been taught how to change the volume and shift through the stations, I retreated to my room, and I passed the time reading till they had gone to bed. After waiting an hour or so for them to fall asleep, I snuck back out into the living room. I turned the radio on, but, still not being used to operating it, I had forgotten to check the volume. It loudly started playing a piece of jazz music. I quickly turned the volume down, foolishly hoping that my parents would somehow sleep through the sudden noise. To my surprise and luck, they did not come out, so I assumed they remained asleep. I patiently shifted through the stations until I found one that played rock music. The host announced that they were playing Tainted Love by Soft Cell. I listened to the radio for about 15 minutes. Looking back, it was such a special atmosphere that night. Just sitting there, alone, in the dark, listening to something I knew I wasn't supposed to listen to. It made me feel like a rebel. After those 15 minutes, though, something changed. The radio appeared to have changed to another station in the midst of a song. There was no music here, though. Instead, it sounded like a distorted conversation between two people. Not in the way two radio hosts may talk, just two normal people. The sound quality wasn't great. It sounded as if the microphone was in a separate room. I could make out some of their words, though. It appeared to be the voice of a man and a teenage girl. They were having an argument of some kind. She was yelling something about him needing to leave her alone. I think she called him Eric. As I sat there and listened for a few minutes, it became clear that Eric was this girl's stepfather. He was trying to make her calm down, telling her to lower her voice, or the neighbors might hear her. Suddenly there was the sound of a few fast, creaking footsteps, and then it sounded like something broke. After that, the radio cut briefly to white noise, before once again returning to playing music I had found the experience very strange, but did not think too much of it, as my father had told me that it was possible for radios to pick up on random signals. I did not feel much like listening to more music, though, and so I went to bed. I continued like this for a few weeks. I'd say good night to my parents and then go to my room and read for a few hours. I'd wait for them to go to bed, and then I'd sneak back out into the living room. Even back then, it seemed a little juvenile to me. Surely a 16-year-old should be allowed to stay up and listen to rock on the radio. I didn't bring it up much to my parents, of course. On the rare occasion that I would, they'd give me a stern talking about the devil and hell. They were like that. Most nights it would just be music, only being occasionally interrupted by the host, announcing the next song. Every 3 or 4 days, though, the radio would intercept another conversation. It would always be the same general situation. A man, generally either a father or a stepfather, and his daughter. They would argue over something, though the specifics were always hard to make out. Sometimes I'd be able to catch the name of the man, other times the name of the girl. I can't recall ever hearing both, though. They would argue, the argument would escalate, and after anywhere between 10 and 30 minutes, the radio would return to playing music again. Though the contents of these weird conversations stood out as odd to me, their presence almost just became part of the experience. There was one, though, the last one. This one felt different from the others. It was, as per usual, an older man and a teenage girl arguing, but something was off. The radio. It was reeking. A horrible stench, like that of spoiled meat, was oozing from the speakers along with the sound. I moved away, repulsed by the smell, but a sudden escalation in the conversation made me move closer, powering through the stench. The girl was screaming, begging, almost. She sounded scared, very scared. I started growing uncomfortable and tried to change the station, but it seemed that the radio was stuck on this signal. Suddenly she let out a terrible screech. It barely sounded human, and more so like a wounded animal. At the height of this scream, it was as if the radio froze in the moment, carrying the same pitch onward for what felt like minutes. After this it cut to white noise, and then again back to what was now a new station. The stench dissipated near instantly. I stopped listening to the radio at night after that. I wanted to bring it up to my parents, to anyone really, but what should I say? I didn't know who it was. I didn't know what had happened. I just knew that it was bad. A week or so after this, I got up one Thursday morning to find my father and mother at the dinner table. They were both looking highly distraught. I asked them what was going on. They said that it was nothing, at least nothing I had concerned myself with. Some bad men had done some bad things, but the police were on the case. There was a newspaper lying on the table next to my dad. It was open on a page with what looked like photos of 12 girls, along with smaller photos of men in the right corner of each picture. The title read something along the lines of 12 young women killed in a large-scale murder case. I didn't get a good look, as my father quickly turned the newspaper around, telling me that it was nothing I should concern myself with. I know it's silly. I knew then, and I know now, but I can't help but think about it. What if, somehow, through some means far beyond my understanding, those girls were broadcasting their dying moments to the world, and my radio happened to pick it up? After that, I'd get up at night every now and then and listened to the radio, no longer paying any attention to the music. But I never heard another conversation like that again.